Had the Russian Federation wanted peace in the Donbas, it would simply have withdrawn its troops from there. Then it would stop supplying the local militants with military hardware, weapons and fuel. To maintain the reputation of a superpower, this process could easily have been slow and not open to the general public. And it was likely that in the spring of 2016, given all pros and cons, the Ukrainian authorities would have agreed to such a compromise. But new military vehicles arrived to the east of Ukraine, and thousands of tons of ammunition and fuel were supplied to the region. The Russian military gained combat experience fighting against the Ukrainian army, and the Donbas was turned into a testing ground for new types of Russian weapons. If the Kremlin ever desired peace, it was only on its own terms. This is episode 85 of the series about the ATO, History of the War. In spring of 2014, the Russian Federation annexed Crimea, and in the following summer invaded the east of Ukraine. As a result of a number of battles, this offensive was successfully halted, but the war was far from over. Espionage and diplomacy, economics, propaganda and armed combat. These all are the elements of hybrid warfare, the reasons for which we're trying to figure out.
Российских войск на Украине нет.
On March 1st, on a dirt road near the village of Toshkivka, Luhansk Oblast, a light armored car of the 80th Brigade drove over a TM-64 anti-tank mine. The resulting explosion killed 3 military servicemen, and 2 more soldiers were seriously injured. In the same area, militants from the left bank of the Seversky Donets River used a grenade launcher to fire at a vehicle belonging to an anti-smuggling group. In the Donetsk sector, low-intensity military operations were carried out in all the traditional hotspots. 5 instances of the use of mortars were registered. 3 more such attacks occurred on the Chermalik-Shirokina section. In total, 14 soldiers were injured over these 24 hours. On March 1st, in Drushkivka, SBU officers detained a DNR fighter who became disenchanted with the idea of the Russian world, and soon after that left the gang formation. Another so-called employee of the Central Intelligence Directorate of the DNR, who was trained in Russia, was detained on the same day in Kharkiv. On March 2nd, there were no instances of shelling in the Luhansk Oblast. However, a Russian sniper fired on a foot patrol of Ukrainian troops. This resulted in the death of a soldier of the 92nd Brigade. Infantry combat continued in the Avdiivka sector, and there were minor provocations in Zolote and on the Svetlodarsk Bulge. At the same time, the focus of confrontation shifted to the Mariupol sector, where the terrorists were actively using mortars and a Zu-23 cannon. The positions recently occupied by Ukrainian troops near Dokuchaevsk and Marinka were attacked. In the Talakivka-Shirokina area, the militants used armored vehicles, taking advantage of the lack of densely built-up areas. In Shirokina itself, mine clearance efforts continued. Within a week since the village was completely liberated, Ukrainian sappers discovered and destroyed 150 different explosive devices. Among the explosive surprises, they also found Russian-made anti-personnel mines. To be fair, it's important to note that unlike Ukraine, the Russian Federation did not sign the Ottawa Convention on the ban on anti-personnel mines. This explains the fact that the Russian army has a huge amount of such munitions, and as a result, they're constantly being actively used by the militants in the east of Ukraine. On March 2nd, the Contact Group on Ukraine signed a mine clearance agreement. According to this agreement, by March 31st, both sides of the conflict were obligated to ensure the appropriate markings of the minefields. Despite this agreement, in February 2016 alone, Ukrainian sappers neutralized more than 1,000 various explosive objects in the Mariupol sector. It is important to understand that despite the agreements and ceasefires, each of these mines, which represent a serious danger to the lives of civilians, could have lain in the ground for decades.
ATO.
On March 3rd at about 5:15 a.m., Russian mercenaries grossly violated the Minsk agreements by using a BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket system against the anti-terrorist operation forces. In fact, there were two attacks at once. One was launched on the village of Nevelsky from Donetsk, and another was in Krasnohorivka from the direction of Staromikhailivka. 10 rockets were fired in both cases. In addition, militants fired mortars at Ukrainian positions near the town of Opitne, on the Svitlodarsk Bulge, near the Horlivka agglomeration and near the Donetsk airport. Hostilities continued both in the daytime and during the night. Moreover, the number of such destructive shelling incidents and the intensity of fire has been sharply aggravated after sunset. In total, 46 instances of shelling were registered during the day in the Donetsk sector, and 11 more violations of the ceasefire regime occurred in the Mariupol sector. 3 Ukrainian soldiers were injured during the day. Wherever it was appropriate and safe for civilians, the ATO forces returned fire, using heavy weapons as well as other means.
Заряжай! Разрешение! Газу! Армата!
On the same day, Luhansk journalist Maria Varfolomeeva was rescued from captivity of militants of the Luhansk National Republic. The militants accused her of espionage due to her professional activities. It is noteworthy that after 419 days of imprisonment, the woman was exchanged for 2 people, one of which was a Russian soldier named Ivan Gorbunov. He was detained in June 2015.
Добрый день.
Представитель какой страны, какого гражданства?
Российская Федерация, россиянин.
Due to the fact that the Russian side does not recognize the participation of its military personnel in the war, Gorbunov wasn't formally recognized as a prisoner of war. As a private individual, he was sentenced to 11 years for participating in a terrorist organization. To conduct the exchange procedure, the president of Ukraine signed a decree that would pardon the militant. On March 4th, in the Luhansk Oblast, militants attacked Ukrainian positions near the town of Popasna twice. The situation escalated in the Donetsk sector. 13 instances of mortar use were registered. As it has already become part of the course, intensification of hostilities was observed during the night. In total, during the day, 42 attacks on the positions of anti-terrorist operation forces took place in the Donetsk sector. In the southern sector, there was trouble near Starohnativka, Chermolik and Shirokina, where the terrorists fired a total of 80 mortar shells at Ukrainian positions. On the same day, a group of reconnaissance specialists of the 73rd Maritime Special Operations Center, while carrying out a mission near Dokuchayevsk, encountered an enemy unit. A battle ensued, leaving 2 Ukrainian soldiers serving in the advance guard mortally wounded. As support, a detachment of the 72nd Brigade promptly advanced to the scene of the battle. This, together with the skillful actions of the Special Forces operatives, allowed them to inflict losses upon the enemy and evacuate the dead and the wounded. As a result, according to the data from intercepted radio communications, the total losses of the militants amounted to around 20. On the same day, SBU officers detained 2 militant informants at once. Another LPR fighter took advantage of the SBU program Waiting for You at Home and surrendered to the authorities. The destruction of the infrastructure that accompanies any military operations has a negative effect on the quality of civilian life. In an attempt to rectify the situation, whenever possible, the Ukrainian army regularly carried out repair and restoration works. Thus, in Pavlopol, they adapted a portable military bridge over the Kalmius River especially for the needs of the civilian population. Access roads were organized and additional metal structures were built to make the use of this overpass convenient for local residents. On March 5th, near Popasna, terrorists used mortars again. The hottest spot in the Donetsk sector was the area around Avdiivka. There, militants fired more than 60 shells of various calibers at Ukrainian positions and also made use of a 2S-1 Gvozdika self-propelled howitzers. It should be noted that the terrorists' weapons were placed within the built-up area of Yasinovata, which seriously complicated the counter-battery fire. As a result, the shelling of Ukrainian positions in the Avdiivka industrial zone lasted about 4 hours. 2 soldiers of the 58th Brigade incurred severe shrapnel wounds and died. On the same day, at the Zaitsevo-Mayorsk line, in the areas on the Svitlodarsk Bulge and near the Donetsk airport, there were constant skirmishes with the sporadic use of mortars. The Marinka checkpoint was hit by militant snipers' fire. This led to a temporary suspension of the checkpoint's operation. Near Dokuchaevsk, militants fired at Ukrainian positions using an IFV's onboard weapons, as well as sniper rifle. However, in this instance, the terrorist activity was quickly suppressed, thus major losses and mass destruction were avoided. On March 6th, there were infantry combat near Shirokine, Vodyane and Marinka. Instances of mortar shelling of Pisky and Opetne near Donetsk as well as Luhansk on the Svitlodarsk Bulge were registered. However, it was Avdiivka that once again became the epicenter of the fighting. The militants, in gross violation of the Minsk agreements, fired more than 200 mortar shells at Ukrainian positions in this area. While suppressing the enemy fire, Ukrainian troops fired on the militants' positions near Yasinovata. By the way, it is worth noting that the Russian representatives of the Joint Center for the Control and Coordination of the Ceasefire were for unknown reasons and purposes present on those same firing positions. The Russian army officers immediately claimed a ceasefire violation by the Ukrainian side, while concealing the facts about the use of heavy weapons by the Russian militants. But given the fact that the Russian military personnel has been seen collaborating with the militants previously, and some of them were even expelled from Ukraine for such a breach of conduct, this behavior comes as absolutely no surprise. Despite the massive shelling, losses on the territory of the Avdiivka industrial zone were avoided thanks to the presence of fortified positions and the skillful actions of Ukrainian soldiers during the attack. However, the militants were traditionally negligent in aiming their guns, causing some of the shells to fall in the residential sector of Avdiivka. The Russian World Movement left 2 more families who ironically spoke Russian without a comfortable home and a hearth. On March 7th, Avdiivka and Pisky remained the epicenter of hostilities. Mortars and tanks were actively used here by the militants. After one of the attacks, in an attempt to capture the Ukrainian stronghold, the positions were attacked by a sabotage group of militants, but fortunately the attack was repelled. A powerful 4-hour shelling of Ukrainian positions took place on the Svitlodarsk Bulge, hitting the villages of Luhansk and Lozove. After an adequate response from the Ukrainian artillery, the situation was successfully stabilized. In Marinka, as well as in the south of the ATO zone, in Hranitne and Shirokine, hostilities continued, but no heavy weapons were used. In total, during the day, there were 54 attacks and 1 instance of close combat in the ATO zone. 3 Ukrainian soldiers were wounded, but without fatalities. The first week of this war's 3rd spring didn't bring any peace to Ukraine. Despite the deals and agreements, fighting continued. Moreover, after the recent rotation of the Russian troops, combat intensity even increased at some points of the demarcation line. The newly arrived invaders were eager for battle, and their hybrid commanders indulged these desires in every way. The Russian Federation regularly supplied its hybrid army with everything necessary, providing livelihoods, ammunition, fuel, and salaries for the soldiers, and in some cases even to the detriment of the material well-being of its own people. At the same time, the official Kremlin has publicly always declared only about peace. The recipe for peace is simple, yet complex at the same time. The recipe is paradoxical, however, as such, the key to peace in eastern Ukraine lies in the hands of the Kremlin.